Good afternoon. I'm Heather with the Institute of Child Nutrition, and I would like to welcome you to April's 2024 CACFP 101 webinar, Basics of Child Nutrition Labels and Product Formulation Statements. As a reminder, today's webinar, all attendees will be muted. There will be time for questions at the end of the presentation. If you have a question, please type it in the question box on your screen. We will try to get to as many questions as possible, but due to our time constraints, every question may not get answered during the webinar. After the webinar ends, a link to complete a short survey will appear. Please complete the evaluation survey. 24 hours after the webinar, individuals who have registered will receive a follow-up email. The email contains a recording link of this webinar available on iLearn, which is ICN's online learning platform, and a link to the evaluation survey in case you missed the pop-up link. ICN will send out webinar certificates of attendance within 24 hours. Due to the nature of this webinar, the slide deck will not be shared with our attendees today. The webinar will only be available in video format. So by the end of this webinar, attendees will identify best practices and tips for child nutrition labels and product formulation statements in the CACFP. The views and opinions expressed in this webinar are solely those of the presenter and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the Institute of Child Nutrition. So today, as our guest speaker, we have Melissa Manning. She is a seasoned consultant dietitian and founder of My School RD. Celebrating 25 years in child nutrition, Melissa has dedicated her entire career to her passion for cooking, creating healthy menus, and CACFP and SLP compliance. And as a former School Meals Initiative audit specialist at the California Department of Education, she has an extensive understanding of audit preparation and regulations. Assisting 15 school districts a year with audits, she stands out as one of the few individuals who genuinely professes, "I adore working on administrative reviews." And in 2022, Melissa established the Nourish and Flourish Foundation, a 501c3 organization mentoring dietetic students through personalized training and experience in child nutrition. Melissa's extensive experience, meticulous approach, and commitment to empowering the next generation can make her a highly respected professional in the field of child nutrition. And just speaking with her on a personal and professional level, she has so much to offer for child nutrition labels and product formulation statements, and she's like super pumped to be here today, and I'm super excited to welcome her. So without further ado, here's Melissa.
Thank you for that warm welcome, Heather. And yes, I am. I'm so pumped. I love administrative reviews, and I honestly really enjoy this documentation that we're going to cover today. I think there's a lot of value in it, and it actually also brings up a lot of other really important aspects of child nutrition, such as where are we purchasing our food, and can we get more food, varieties of food in other places? So with no further ado, I'm going to share my screen and start our presentation. So today, again, we're speaking on the basics of child nutrition labels and product formulation statements. We're going to focus in on best practices, practical tips for using child nutrition labels and product formulation statements, specifically in CACF programs. So we're talking everywhere from our smaller in-home daycares up to larger operations and even school districts that are offering snack and supper programs. Go to the next slide. Oops, there we go. I've already been introduced, but I wanted to add also that where I started my career was in CACFP. It was because I had 2 young children, and this started in 1997. So I've been in child nutrition for quite some time. I've really loved it. My best friend had her own in-home daycare, and I also worked with some foster programs for our youth, and it was just something that's really near and dear to my heart, And because it was so early in my career that I worked with these programs, I made a lot of mistakes. And I'm super excited to share what I learned, how I got there, and to open up, hopefully, the world of product formulation statements and CN labels for you to empower your programs to thrive and grow. So, what are we covering today? First of all, we have a general understanding of the importance of CN labels and product formulation statements. You know, this documentation is kind of a pain, and it's a lot of extra work. It's not always easy to get. I really struggled in that area, so we're going to focus in on that. But then also, like, why are we doing this? I don't like really being told what to do, but if it has meaning to me, then there's some value there. So it's super important for me to start with that, I felt. And then second, we're going to go into how to obtain product formulation statements. We're going to cover what they are as well as CN labels, but then there's a whole world out there of product formulation statements. But how do I get them? Where do I look? Where do we begin? So I'll give you we'll do a deep dive into that. And then third of all, I have some tips and takeaways for CN labels and product formulation statements, general things to understand, mistakes that people make most often, and hopefully those little tidbits that provide some extra value. So I love interaction and polls. And so it's time. We're going to start off with a poll. This is going to be a pop-up on your screen, and we have about a minute to answer. I'm curious about you. You've heard about me. How many children do you feed in your program? Now, you might have differing amounts of children that you're feeding at different points in time. So I would choose the meal that is the highest number of children that you're feeding. And this would be like on your average day. How many at the highest number of children's meals are you feeding? And we've got about a minute for that, or as soon as we get to about 70% of the audience. And the poll answers just popped up. So we have about 10% of our participants today that are feeding between 0 to 15 children, and then another 11% for 15 to 30 children. And then we've got a whopping almost 80% with 40 or more children. So that really gives me a good idea. Thank you so much of where you're at, where your challenges are. And I'm going to address all three of those categories in our webinar today. Going on to the next slide. I think my computer kind of falls asleep a little bit there. Okay. Now, what are we talking about here? What is the reason for product formulation statements in CN labels? We're talking about store-bought combination foods that contain specifically meat alternate, and grains, oftentimes, things that we're buying that are pre-made. So instead of making a pizza from flour and yeast, we're talking about buying a pre-made pizza that's heat and serve, or even maybe just a hot pizza from, say, a Domino's or something. Now we've got burgers also, chicken nuggets, corn dogs. These are all foods that make it easier to serve to our students because we're not making them from scratch. And these are popular kid-friendly items as well. So we, of course, want to have the options of purchasing the items and not having to make them from a recipe. And specifically, I want to hone in here on the reason that we have this documentation is we've had instances in restaurants, like there was Subway and the tuna. How much tuna is in their tuna sandwich? Or Taco Bell, how much beef is in their taco meat? We have no idea. There is no transparency required from manufacturers and restaurants to tell us how much real chicken is in our chicken, How much chicken is in a chicken nugget? Is it filler? We had a funny bounce test. If drop the chicken nugget, how far does it bounce? You really don't want your meatball to bounce really high, and that could be a problem. So that's what this whole concept is about. USDA said, no, we're drawing the line. We need transparency. We need to know that we're getting quality here. So over a decade ago, they created product formulation statements as a regulation. The C in labels and product formulation statements are required in our program if we buy processed products that contain creditable meat, and then sometimes also grains and sometimes vegetables and such. So we're going to deep dive into what these are about, what is required, how to get them. So we do want to have them. This is the one little caveat: have these documents on file before the item is served, so that you in time should have a pretty large volume of this documentation on hand. Okay, so I started to talk about it a little bit. Of course, we know that it's required. That's where all of this comes up. So regulation is the first reason. If we don't have that documentation, then basically we cannot serve that food and say that it credits for the meat or grain towards our meal pattern. So it is required. It is also oftentimes a fiscal finding, meaning they could take money away from our program because those meals are not reimbursable if we don't have this documentation. So that's a pretty harsh requirement of the CACFP program, as well as NSLP. Second of all, the reason is we really want to know how much real food is in our food. Like I said, with the chicken nuggets, we don't know. Even things that we think of being as high quality. I have done tests and research and data analysis, and oftentimes those high quality foods that we think is going to be even more nutritious and contain, like deli turkey meat, high quality deli turkey meat, does it contain more turkey? Well, if you compare the protein values, it oftentimes doesn't. This is all marketing. So product formulation statements give us assurance that we actually have turkey in our deli turkey meat and how much of it. It is also a commitment to quality. It allows us to know that we can focus on nutrient-dense foods to feed our kids nutritious items for optimal health and growth, because that is why we're here, right? We are feeding and fueling our kids' growth, their nutrition, their learning, their physical activities, so that they can run around and have a healthy childhood. So basically, this all encompasses that concept. And that's how I get so excited about it. It's because I don't like being lied to. This is the only program in the United States that makes manufacturers disclose what is in our food that we're eating and how much of it. I get really excited. I'm sure you can tell. So, okay, we got another poll on this. What is your level of knowledge about CN labels and product formulation statements? If you could please click in, answer. We've got a beginner, just learning, intermediate, or do you consider yourself advanced? So I would love to hear from you about where you see yourself at. And so I can go into more depth. If we've got a lot of beginners or advanced, then we can do a little bit more skimming on certain things. All right, so we're ready. We've got our poll responses. Thank you so much for participating. So we have 29% of our audience today is beginner, just learning. That's so exciting that you're here. Thank you so much. I hope to make this pretty straightforward for you and give you some resources to get started. And then we have about half, 54% of the audience today is intermediate, and about 17% is advanced. Awesome. Congratulations to getting to that level. That's exciting. Okay, so now let's talk about some of the nitty-gritty, the compliance aspect of C and labels and product formulation statements. So C and labels are different than product formulation statements. C and labels are provided by the USDA. They specifically have this box that says CN, and it states the amount of meat and or grain that the product is crediting for. So in the case of this corn dog, our CN label states that a serving amount, each 4-ounce jumbo turkey corn dog provides 2-ounce equivalent meat and 2-ounce equivalent grains for the child nutrition meal pattern requirements. And this is a regulated food label. Actually, it costs companies a lot of money to go through this process of having the CN label on their product packaging. And that's where you would get it from. So basically, if you take a look at the box, the package of the turkey corn dogs that they come in, then it would have this label on the box. What we do is grab your phone, take a photo. You can, and then keep that on file. And I would take a photo of the entire label, including the CN label, making sure that it's legible. Like, can I read it? Can I read the little tiny print of each 4-ounce jumbo turkey corn dog and how much it credits? So the whole label, take a photo, keep it in an electronic file or folder, or print it out. You can also, if you've got a printer, put the whole box right on your printer and make sure you got that CN label centered, and keep that document on file. So you can also cut them out. We used to do that back years and years ago. We would just cut the whole CN label off. That can be very difficult to do. It's also very awkward to store. So the photo is excellent. It's just fine. The other thing that I get asked a lot is, well, I found the CN label online. And oftentimes the manufacturer's website might show the CN label, but there will be a thing across it, copy not for documenting the USDA meal pattern requirements. Something of that sort. There's also like an X through the CN label. They'll put an X through it and on top of it. And so what you need to know about that is you still need to take a photo of the box. It can't have an X through it, and it shouldn't say copy not for documenting purposes, as it really does mean that. So get out your camera, send somebody into the freezer and take those photos. Now, product formulation statements. We have way more product formulation statements available to us than we do have CN labels, typically, especially for the variety of brands that are out there for our child nutrition programs. So what's great about a product formulation statement is it doesn't cost the company anything to put this together. So basically any company out there that even if you're purchasing something from a company, you might be able to convince them to fill out a product formulation statement so you can buy their products. It also is not guaranteed by USDA. So we have some more double checking to do to make sure that the manufacturer filled it out correctly. And so basically what we have here is a pizza as an example, and they're little pizza bites. And we've got everything from the serving size to how much flour credits towards the grain, and the signature at the bottom. So what does this mean? We actually know that if, like, say we were talking about a muffin, we know how much flour is in that muffin kind of compared to the sugar, right? So they're stating for us how much grain or meat these things that we're purchasing actually credit for. So here's one that's meat. we have mozzarella cheese. There's 2 ounces of mozzarella cheese in these pizza bites, and they credit 2 ounces towards the meal pattern. What's really important about product formulation statements is it has this math problem, and the math has to show the ingredient that's creditable, and it has to reference the food buying guide. So something that's in the food buying guide. It has to say how much of that ingredient is in one serving size, and then what the food buying guide says is the yield per serving. So this is something that the food buying guide gives you, and then you multiply it out and you get your creditable amount. So sometimes we might have a document and it just says that the cheesy bites provide 2 ounces of meat, but it doesn't say how did we get there. So it must say how to get there. We have a guarantee they're not cheaping out on just putting a tiny little sprinkle of cheese that's expensive, right? And a bunch of sauce inside our pizza bites, but rather the students, the kids, they are getting that high quality cheese with a lot of good protein and calcium and magnesium and such, right? That they need to grow. So I'm going to dive into what are the parts of a product formulation statement that we need to double check. Because remember, these are not approved by the USDA. So it's on us to make sure that it contains everything it needs to contain. So first of all, they recommend a company letterhead. If no company letterhead, it at least needs to say the name of the company. And sometimes there are these forms that USDA puts online, and the company will just fill out USDA's form, and that's just fine. So it wouldn't, in that case, be on a company letterhead. They might just use USDA's form. And so if you're like wanting a company to fill out a form, they can go to the USDA website, just simple Google search, USDA product formulation statement, manufacturer, and it'll come up with all of the documentation and explanation on how to fill it out. Okay, second of all, what do we need? We need the product name. I said the manufacturer, then also a product code, because oftentimes companies will make a large variety of even just a corn dog. There might be many different turkey, reduced fat turkey, reduced sodium, reduced fat turkey, corn dog. It's all different corn dogs. They're all different products with differing amounts of actual raw turkey that went into processing and making this corn dog. And then we need like the serving size. We need the creditable ingredients, as I covered. And then they need to tell us what's our total amount of meat and or grain that's in the product that will contribute to the meal pattern, so that we're really clear. This 4 ounce, 4 pieces of these pizza bites will credit 2 ounces of meat and 2 ounces of grain. Now, they also require a name and a signature of the company representative. This is because if there's something wrong with this product formulation statement, you have a person to contact, a person to call. That person is the representative that either put this documentation together and can answer your questions, or would be able to answer questions if, say, you were audited and things came up. So it's super important to have that, as well as the date, and just double check, make sure that it's current. So there are some ones floating out there from, say, 2014 and 2017 and many years back, but it is required that they be current product formulation statements. Okay, so we have one more poll for today. Where do you purchase food for your program? And then CACFP, we have a great variety of small in-home daycares all the way up to our larger school districts. So I'm curious, where are you going? And you can choose all that apply. It doesn't have to be just one answer. We've got grocery store, supermarket, big box store. That would be like a Costco or a restaurant depot, like where you're getting bigger cases of items. or larger bags, not just the family size bag. Then we've got online stores. What are online stores? We're talking Amazon. We're talking Walmart.com. So are you buying things online? And then finally, distributors. Those are those larger distributors like US Foods, Cisco, Gold Star. There's many across the country. Okay, we've got our answer. Thank you, Brad. So where do you, yeah, Brad's running the polls. So where do you purchase food? We've got 41% that purchase at a grocery store and a supermarket. So their local supermarket is where they're going to get their foods. 15% are going to our bigger box stores like our Costco's or restaurant depots. 9% are going online to the Amazons or the Walmart.coms. And then finally, 78%, so almost 80% of the audience today are buying from a distributor, like a Cisco, a US Foods, or a Gold Star. Thank you for that. So depending on where you're purchasing your food can tell you different, like your source of where you can get your product formulation statements or a CN labeled product. First, contacting your distributor. We, US Foods, Cisco, Gold Star, GFS, Shamrock, I could go on and on. All of those distributors are quite familiar with product formulation statements and CN labels. Some of them, like Gold Star, only really has foods in stock that are for schools and have product formulation statements and CN labels. But when we're talking about US Foods or Cisco, they've got a lot of restaurant foods mixed in, and those don't contain product formulation statements or CN labels. A search term that I like to use to narrow down all of the options that are out there is CN. So I search that for the name of the product. So that would be in the name of the product is CN for child nutrition. Another search term that I've used is WG for whole grain or typing out whole grain, because oftentimes, our restaurant varieties of things that we purchase will not be whole grain. But if they are, they've got the child nutrition programs in mind. So that's another search term that can get you products that are probably most likely not guaranteed, but most likely compliant for child nutrition programs. And then those products will allow us to contact the manufacturer to get that product formulation statement from them. There are a lot of manufacturer websites out there where you can just get the product formulation statement from online. We've got, if you're buying potatoes, potato wedges, tater tots, spiral fries, crisp cut fries, all the different varieties, or Ida or McCain is one manufacturer website where they just got all of them online for you to download. Other ones are larger manufacturers like General Mills, Pillsbury. Then we've got associations and membership groups. We've got some wonderful associations in the CACFP that are so helpful with practical advice and tips. And they also have parts of their webpage that have product formulation statements on them. Then calling the manufacturer and requesting it is a tip. And then searching the internet, just doing a Google search, and social media groups as well are other resources. So let's dive into a couple of these. So I remember being a little timid and nervous about reaching out to a manufacturer. And then also, sometimes when I called manufacturers, they were like, what are you talking about? And then I go on this wild goose chase of trying to narrow down someone that could answer my question, and nobody knew, and it was taking all this time. Well, my suggestion is to, if you can find a product formulation statement for even that manufacturer, a different product, there's going to be that contact information at the bottom of the product formulation statement. So that would be a great person to contact. They're very familiar with what you're asking for. Also, you can see here, like for Tyson, it says call the food service customer relations team. Food service is the key word here. So we're not calling the customer call line for our little like buying a serving of something because I'm going to a grocery store and it's made for families. Even though I can buy the Tyson chicken nuggets at my local grocery store, I'm going to call the food service phone number and they're going to know what I'm talking about. So that's my tip on that. And then also, like for the manufacturer's website, this is General Mills. They have a whole page that's dedicated to a ton of products that you can buy in grocery stores, all the way on up to distributors. And you're going to get what's the latest information from them. So now talking about a larger internet search. There are school districts and a lot of other people that have posted product formulation statements, put them on a line on their websites. But how do we find them? So some search terms that I use are PFS, product formulation statement, child nutrition, food service, as we talked about, like adding that food service in, even if you're going to a grocery store, is usually where we're going to find those product formulation statements. CACFP, K-12, and NSLP, since those programs are combined and needing this documentation. I also include the exact name from the packaging, the manufacturer name, and if I've got a UPC or product code, those could be helpful. And when I get my search results, I also click into the images, because even though sometimes we've got a website that it goes to and those will give me results, sometimes it's just a photo of the product formulation statement. So I'll click in the images of my search results. Okay, let's talk about social media groups. This is just one social media group where it just is a great resource. You can interact, ask questions. Actually, just yesterday, this came up. This was a post. Has anyone been able to get a PFS for these slider patties from Sam's, or know an email to get one? And there was a thoughtful response on that they could go to the food buying guide and calculate these amounts. And then also I've seen the questions of, do you have it for this meatball from this manufacturer, from Costco or whatever else? And people will chip in and give them a link. And it surprised me how many things are actually available out there that people have requested. All right. So I hope that gives you some options of places to go to find these product formulation statements, practical places, right? And that was from like over my career, thousands, but over that point in time where I was really focusing on daycares and smaller facilities, I spent hundreds of hours like making calls and calling the wrong number and going down wild goose chases in places. So I hope that really gets you to finding the documentation that you need easily. But I've got a few more tips. So first of all, it can be confusing what the terminology is. Nutrition fact labels, which are on the left here, and ingredients lists on the right, are not the same as CN labels. So nutrition fact labels are calories, are fat, are protein. And even though protein is important, we're really looking for either a CN label that just talks about the equivalent meat, the equivalent grain. So they're very different things. So it's important to kind of do that memorization of nutrition fact labels are this, but this is not necessarily the documentation for meat and grain. Where is this important? This is important for our cereal, calculating sugar. This is important for our yogurt, calculating sugar. This is important to prove that we are serving whole grains, but specifically, we're really honing in today on nutrition fact labels and or on product formulation statements and CN labels. So just to differentiate, this is not necessarily the document that you're looking for. Also, it can be confusing. There's lots of brands of, say, even just a bean and cheese burrito. A lot of manufacturers make all these frozen pizzas, right? But just because we have a product formulation statement from one brand, like this is Los Cabos, it does not necessarily apply to one from Ardela's, or like one pizza is not the same as another brand's pizza. And so we really have to get the identical product, the documentation on the identical product that we are purchasing. And okay, so for meat and meat grain, like pizza has meat and grain in it, or like say deli turkey, for those dishes, if there is not a CN label or product formulation statement, like I really want to purchase this product, it's a great quality product, I'm sure, but I don't have the CN label or product formulation statement, then actually the item just may not even be creditable, meaning you can't even use it to credit for meat or grain. You can't make the assumption, is what the USDA says. Your meal then, if you decide to put that on the menu or to serve it to students, the meal, if it's not creditable, would not be reimbursable. And what do I do then? Well, I have to purchase a different product. That's just the way it goes. Okay, second tip, CN labels. It says here each 3.4 ounce serving of 4 nuggets provides 2 ounces of meat and 1 equivalent grain for the CN meal pattern requirements. So do we have to always give our kids 4? Well, no, we've got kids that are way younger than just our school age students. So a 1 to 2-year-old, we can go ahead and divide out and find that 1 ounce meat then would be 2 nuggets. And a 3 to 5-year-old would then need 3 nuggets to provide 1.5 ounce meat. So it's okay to provide lower than the serving size that is on the CN label. Just be careful that you're doing your math right and dividing out how much of that product they need to be given. And sometimes, say it's 5 chicken nuggets is 2 ounce meat, so it doesn't divide right. In that case, we always give them more. We never give them less, because we want to make sure to provide them enough protein, if not more, but we never want to cut them short, right? So if you're ever wondering about like, well, how do I round? What do I do? Always give them more. Give them more nutrition. Okay, then I've got tips on documentation. My first tip is ensure your product formulation statements are filled out correctly. There are product formulation statements that are just not. The most common mistake on this is that it doesn't show the actual amount of chicken in my chicken nugget. It just states that if you give them 4 nuggets, say on a CN label, that's okay. You don't need any more documentation. USDA is like stationed in their factory and they're paying a ton of money to get this label because it is a guarantee. But on a product formulation statement specifically, and we want to make sure that it contains that amount of chicken. How much chicken is it? Where's my little math problem that shows it calculates out to be the 2 ounce of meat or however amount of meat that they're saying it is. Okay, secondly, keep all labels in a safe place, like a binder or an e-folder. So it's okay to keep them electronically. In fact, I changed to everything being electronic because I can pull things up easily from anywhere that I'm at. I can check allergens, I can check how much red food coloring is in the ingredients list and everything else without having to flip a ton of pages. So, and I can pass it on to other people as well. I can pass the staff the heating instructions, it's all on the product formulation statement. And when I save a product formulation statement or a CN label in an electronic format, the way that I name it is I call it the name of the product, Cheese Pizza Bites. And then I add the manufacturer name. Let's say it's Ardela's. And then I put the product code, or if there's a lot of people buying from a distributor, I'll put the distributor ordering code, the vendor code. as the final part of how I name this document. Then, if I'm looking for a chicken product, I can just type chicken in my electronic file search in my folder, and it'll bring up everything that has chicken. If it's, I know that it's a Tyson product and I can't remember what the product is, exactly what it was called, then I can just type in Tyson and it'll bring up all of the products and their product formulation statements that are from Tyson. And then that product code helps me narrow it down, or vendor code helps me narrow down exactly which is the one. Because oftentimes I'll get a lot of chicken nuggets during the year. And so that really helps to know which is the one that I'm opening up without having to open up a bunch of things. I also use an archive folder. So keeping things for a number of years is important, but sometimes I can get bogged down by a lot of different things that are very similar. So I just put those extra items that I'm no longer using in my archive folder. So that is the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for attending. We also have a Q&A that we can start right now. I wanted to give you plenty of time to fit in your questions. Hopefully, this has been thought-provoking and it leads to other, like, how do I do this? Where do I go for that? What are my suggestions? I do have some resources actually, which are off my slide that I wanted to share because, like, for me, I have to see things. I want to see them in action. So let me show you those real quick before we jump on over to the Q&A. But this is, what did I do? I went and did a Google search for product formulation statement, CACFP, and what did it come up with? This is one of many free websites, things that are out there. This is specifically for the CACFP program. It does have a little caveat, like the labels and product formulation statements can be used at your discretion. They are not double checked to be compliant. So that's, you know all about what to do now or how to double check them. But look at all these vendors and things that you can buy at a grocery store that you might recognize. So Butterball, Jimmy Dean. We've got, what did I find? I found Stouffer's in here. So Stouffer's lasagna, Costco, like, wow. These things are all right here. You click the view print and you can have your product formulation statement right there to save. So this was, I clicked on a Stouffer's lasagna and here we go. It tells us the serving amount. It's signed. And then here's my amount of actual ground beef in their lasagna. Was anyone ever curious how much, you buy something like the lasagna, how much actual meat did they put in there? How much cheese did they put in there? Well, here you've got those answers. So that was a neat resource, and I believe that'll be linked in the chat for you. Another resource is looking to our national and local associations. So again, I just Google searched the CACFP product formulation statements, and one of the results was this list of brands that have product formulation statements specifically geared towards CACFP programs. And if you don't recognize some of them, like we do recognize Dole, but we might not recognize ES Foods, or maybe you don't recognize Darlington. These are things that you might be able to purchase on Amazon.com or on Walmart or other online stores that are out there as well. So that might open up a whole other area of things that you can buy from. And not only that, but I went to my local stores too. Let me add this. And I asked them, will you carry this product? And they said yes. So that's another option for you. If you've got a product in mind, like a Foster Farms corn dog, then you can go to your grocery store and say, hey, I really would love for you to carry this. And they were pretty nice about providing that. Okay. Now, this is Another thing that I found useful, because I was like looking for brand names that I could recognize in my local grocery store and be able to pick things up at my Costco and stuff. But I didn't know, like, I called so many people and they were like, what are you talking about? We don't know what a product formulation statement is. Or they would send me a nutrition fact label, right? Where I'm like, oh man, I wanted a CN label, not a nutrition fact label. This is a manufacturer's report from USDA and lists all these different manufacturers that are familiar with school lunch programs and make CN products, but they also probably make product formulation statements for other products that are not necessarily CN labeled. That's another resource. And then we've got Exhibit A. This is our grains chart. So for these items, you might be able to get a product formulation statement, but let's say we can't. So long as our grain is enriched or whole grain, and I'm not going to get into all the caveats with that, you can utilize this chart to see if you can still serve it by using the chart's calculations. And finally, if you can find it in the food buying guide, then it doesn't necessarily even need a product formulation statement. So this is just doing a Google search. And again, this is in the chat. You can go to the interactive tool. You can go to the app. I like to go to the PDF. And there are webinars on how to use this as well. So I clicked on the food buying guide PDF. And this is kind of the reading I do in front of the fireplace in the evening. I think it's really interesting. So we have things like chicken and how much chicken you have to buy to serve 100 students. But then we also, like, what else is in here? There's things like chicken a la king, chicken chili. This means you don't have to get a product formulation statement for this item. If you buy specifically chicken chili, like canned chili, that's called chicken chili on the label. That's the big important thing. It's a standard of identity according to USDA. So they basically tell the manufacturer how to make it if they want to do chicken chili specifically. And so they can guarantee that there is 1.9 ounce of cooked poultry meat in 3/4 cup of any chicken chili at a grocery store. Like, who would have thought? It's a really random bunch of products that are in here, but I just thought, wow, that's pretty wild. Specifically, if I buy chicken salad and it's labeled chicken salad with those words, then I can just have the food buying guide take a photo of the label and I don't need a product formulation statement. So good reading, fun stuff. Well, that does actually conclude the information that I wanted to provide for you. And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and we can jump into Q&A then.
Thanks for all that information, Melissa. We've gotten quite a few really good questions, a lot of duplicated questions. So we are going to check those out now. One of the questions that we have, I have a cat that decided to join me. One of the things that we have one of the questions is, how long do I need to keep documentation on file?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking. So the official rule is to keep them on file for 3 years. However, if you, for some reason, like we had COVID, we were not audited in 3 years, it went longer. I just keep it at least the length of my last audit and or 3 years, whichever is the longer amount of time.
All right. Another question is, what if we can't find a product formulation statement or a CN label for a product that we want to serve? What should we do?
Another really great question, because there was a lot of products that I wish I could have purchased. And I was like, oh man, what do I do now? So first of all, I would look to the food buying guide. I would look to that grains chart if it's a grain product like a muffin or something. And in that case, we don't need a product formulation statement. Yay. If we can find a matching thing on either of those locations. So that would be my first place to go to, which is why I find it such fun reading. Like, wow, I could have been serving this. I didn't even need a product formulation statement. Yes. And then the other answer to that is you can make it from scratch. So maybe try finding a recipe, and then you know what credible ingredients, you know how much chicken is going to go in your chicken tender because you're making it. So that's another option for you. But then finally, if still that's not an option, we simply can't serve it. We have to choose something else.
All right. And another one is, where can I find products that are CN labeled? You've offered a lot of really great resources, and those are actually included in the chat box. And we will also be providing those as a resource link on the recorded webinar within iLearn. But would you like to maybe expand on that a little more, or?
Yeah, yeah. So I just really want to hone in on this. And it's such an important question because this, I hope, really opens up your world of purchasing, especially if you're not able to get things directly from a distributor or you want to look outside of the box. So I would check the see and label list on USDA. I would check the anything that is for school nutrition. Things that are whole grain are places to check. And then many of our biggest brands are going to also sell to schools. We're talking those mega brands like General Mills, Pillsbury, Post, Malto Meal. Smuckers is another one. Pepperidge Farm, Annie's, which is that organic graham crackers and such, those cute little bunnies. They have product formulation statements. Also, in terms of like chickens, I've name dropped Tyson a lot just because they have a ton of availability everywhere we go. Foster Farms. So going towards those big brands as well, and then contacting a Costco or your big box store and seeing, do you have a list of child nutrition products is another option as well. Some of even those bigger box stores might even have lists for you. So those are some options. Yeah.
So this is a recurring question. Which is better, the CN label or the product formulation statement? What's, I guess, when we look at them versus each other, which is more important, or which stamps out the other? I guess give us some insight on that, because that is a hot question in the Q&A box. Which is better?
Okay. So better is kind of a relative term in terms of hard, sometimes hard to find products. CN labels are going to be harder to find at a smaller grocery store. In terms of a big distributor, a CN labeled product would be easier to find because you can search by CN, but then double check to make sure it actually has the label. Sometimes they'll just put CN and it doesn't have the label. Now, taking the photo of the label can be more complicated than having an electronic file ready to go. Like, how do I file that? How do I store it? So that would be more complicated. But you don't have to figure out to make sure it's compliant because it's a guaranteed compliance just by having that photo. So is it better? Is it not better? That's really up to you to decide. But I mean, in general, the number of items that are CN labeled is really small compared to the wealth of items that have product formulation statements. So I never hesitate about getting a product formulation statement for a product instead of just buying CN.
And another really great question that we're getting in is, do CN labels expire? Do product formulation statements expire? What, I guess, is the best practice for when to look at that? What do you consider to be current? What's the length of time? How often should our program operators really be reviewing these? What's best practice?
Yeah, because we've got a regulation, right? And then we've got best practice, which are not really the same. So I'm going to answer regulation is the 3 years or audit. However, best practice is a whole other ballgame. Best practice could mean allergens that I'm looking for. When I'm looking for my product documentation, I want to have the allergens off of that. And allergens change way more often than we realize. They might be producing something in their factory, not really change the product, but because they're producing a sesame seed product in their factory, suddenly sesame seed could migrate into my product and introduce a new allergen. So for now, if you're not taking allergens into account, then I would choose every 3 years. I'm not looking at the day I download. I'm looking at the date on the documentation. So that signed, dated bottom of the document. The other thing is to consider that if you know the product has been reformulated, then we have to change it out. So if you hear in the pipeline somewhere, you get a letter from the manufacturer that they've got the same product code, but it's a new formulated product, you definitely want to update that. Even the serving sizes are different and the crediting can change as well. But in terms, like I get most often in terms of allergens, I would choose like no older than January of 2022. January of 2022, 23. We're in 24, January of 23. Okay, revising that. Guess what happened in January of 2023? The USDA approved the requirement or like made required that they include sesame seeds in the allergens. So anytime before that, you're not going to get sesame allergens. So your allergens are not going to be correct. They just didn't even list it. So it looks like there's not sesame allergens in that document or in that product, but there might be because it's just not even mentioned. So that is my recommendation. And that's really recent. So be really careful with sesame allergens. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I do want to caution our audience members that it is imperative that you take on the burden of making sure that the products, the food items that you serve in your programs do meet meal pattern requirement. Because any crediting information that you've received from a manufacturer other than the CN label, you really need to do due diligence on making sure that that's accurate before you include that in your reimbursable meal. So if you do have lingering questions about product compliance, if it meets your meal pattern requirements, you really need to direct those to your state agency or to your sponsoring organization. So just remember that the burden of proof falls on you, the program operator. You know, don't reference ICN's webinar in April that says that we can use Schmuckers to do this. So make sure you have documentation and make sure that you have proof, because that is what keeps you from getting into trouble. So another question that we have, so a lot of our program operators may have vendors or vended meals. Who is in charge of keeping up with that information, those CN labels, those product formulation statements? How do you do that? What do you do when you're using vended meals?
Yeah, that is a really complicated question. So still, just like Heather said, the burden of proof is still on you as the food provider, the entity that is getting reimbursement. It doesn't matter what the vendor says. They can give you assurances all day long. The person that gets the fiscal finding is going to be you. So that is the first thing that is the most important and confusing aspect of it, because in our vended meals, we're really giving a lot of control to them and trust that they're making compliant meals. You should write in your contract and make sure it's clear that you can have access to all of those product formulation statements and to the recipes, that they can be double checked. Because again, even though you're relying on them for the documentation, it's still the SFA, the School of Food Authority, or the person that signed up with CACFP, that entity is the one that's responsible for this. And there are, unfortunately, in my experience, a great deal of vended meals that they don't quite understand the program. They know how to cook great food, and that's great, but it still does not meet the requirements necessarily.
Absolutely. So we also have another question, and this is about scratch food or homemade food, that sort of thing. Do you need to keep labels for that?
Well, that let's pretend I'm making a popcorn chicken mashed potato bowl, and then I'm purchasing popcorn chicken. So absolutely, I need a product formulation statement for the popcorn chicken. Now, if we're talking about needing to run a nutrient analysis, then we're really shifting over to a different subject. But for any processed product where I am crediting meat and grain and I can't find it in the food buying guide or in the grains chart, then we need a product formulation statement or a CN label so we can really tell how much chicken's in our chicken.
So I have two more questions. The other question is, can you please reiterate when a CN label or product formulation statement is needed?
Yes, yes, absolutely. And this is where I really did seriously sit in front of a fireplace on many a night and read and flip through the food buying guide and see what doesn't need a product formulation statement. What can I offer that is outside of like the random things like I showed you, right? Like what I don't understand why these certain canned foods, like these certain chicken chilies, are in the food buying guide, but they're there, right? Now, I can tell you why they're in there. The reason is because we have a government standard of identity for these certain products that were established, many of them many years ago, decades ago. And if you make this product as a manufacturer, you have to follow strict guidelines as to what's in it. So there is a guarantee of that certain amount of turkey or chicken or beef in those products. But those are the ones like that you don't have to get product formulation statements for. You do need product formulation statements for any other products that are not listed in there, especially again, we're going into our meats and our grains. But then sometimes if we've got, say, a fruit or vegetable, so for example, roasted chickpeas in a bag or like a cup of hummus, you would still need a product formulation statement for that. It's processed. It's had a lot of stuff due to it. It's not just a raw edamame, it's a roasted edamame in a bag, right? So anything that's not in the food buying guide, you would still need if it's processed.
And our last question, we have some people who are in a really rural area and maybe they're on a strict budget. We have a lot of smaller child care centers. We have some family child care providers who have limited funds for these types of things, and they may have trouble accessing a wide variety of food items that maybe a larger center or a school district can have access to, and they have to shop local. So how do you mitigate the issue, especially if you shop at the smaller box stores like Aldi or Save-A-Lot or IGA or Kroger or Walmart? And I don't want to, none is preferred over the other. I mean, sometimes you only have one grocery store in your local area. So what should you do if you can only stay local and you are on a stricter budget? How do we mitigate the child nutrition labels and the product formulation statement requirements?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's hard, especially in those areas. So I have a bunch of little things, and hopefully they add up to something that can be valuable for you. So you might be able to order things online in bulk. So that might be an option to go on, say, get a membership to one of these bigger online companies and get them shipped directly to you. Also, contacting your store, asking the store if they have a 1-800 number to the larger corporate store, and then seeing if they have a list of items that are specifically child nutrition program. I'm using that term really deliberately, child nutrition program, NSLP or CACFP compliant. And they surprisingly have heard this question before, but thank goodness. So not everybody's going to have it, right? But it's something that you can do, as well as check the Facebook page, put a post up, say, hey, I live by an Aldi's. Does anyone know of any Aldi's products that they have product formulation statements for? Right. And then there's a lot of participation, and people will be wonderful help because they've gone through, again, like all of how hard it is to find this documentation. And they're like, yeah, I worked on this for so long, but I have a golden ticket. Here's what you do. So yeah, sharing is really wonderful. Sharing is caring, and we really do care in these programs, which is another reason, we love it so much what we do.
Absolutely. So I just want to reiterate to our audience members today that there will be recorded this webinar, even though it's live, will be recorded at a later date for you to look at and to refresh and to share with others. In addition to the recorded webinar, you also have a resource list there that will feature all of the links that we provided in the chat box. Also, I cannot state enough loudly and clearly that if you have questions concerning how food items credit, or if you have questions about CN labels or product formulation statements, it's imperative, so very, very important, that you contact your state agency or your sponsoring organization for more clarification. Melissa, thank you so much for being with us today. I love your energy. I love how excited you get about these types of documentations, and you've renewed my interest and fervor in this subject. So thank you. Thanks again to our audience members for joining us today. We appreciate all that you do, and thank you guys again for what you do for the children across the whole U.S. We appreciate you guys. Have a great day and be safe.